Hello everyone, hope you're all doing well. I am doing a tag today. I am very behind with my tag videos, so I thought today I have a little bit of time. I'm going to do a couple of them and just catch up. The first one is probably a little bit beyond the limit of time because it's the end of the year book tag, and it's now, what is it, 26th of January. I'm still in January, so let's pretend that I'm still in time to do it. But it's a fun one because I haven't done any tag that is kind of looking back at my 2021 as a year of reading. So there's something that I hope can be interesting to share with you guys. The original creator of this tag is Keir the Scrivener, so I'm going to link it below. And I think most people that I'm following on BookTube have already either done this tag or talked about their 2021 in retrospective. So I'm a little late with this game, but bear with me. I'm going to try and be brief in my... These are 10 prompts, so let's get started. The first one is how did you feel about this reading year? You can choose an adjective or expand. I actually felt great. I use Goodreads quite often, and I noticed that the average rating that I gave on my books in 2021, and in total I think there are 69 or 70 books, was 4.1, which is really high. If you think about 70 books, and I'm not always kind or generous in my ratings, my rating on Goodreads is purely meaning the level of enjoyment that I have of the book. So there's nothing really objective that I put in my rating. It's more like a personal way to remember how much I enjoyed that book. And with an average of 4.1, I think it was a pretty great year. So that's my answer to question number one. Number two, what are two phases or authors that you went through this year? Well, okay, the first one is easy, is Dante. I'm very grateful to anyone who is following my channel for your interest in my Divine Comedy project that should finish around end of April, beginning of May this year with the Last Canto of Paradiso. But the second one was a great discovery for me, thanks to BookTube as well, which is, well, I knew Dante before, but thanks to BookTube I discovered Gene Wolfe, who was a fantastic fantasy and maybe a little bit science fiction writer, American author. I really didn't know him before, and he is almost more known in the literary circle, or maybe he's a writer's writer, somebody who's known more by writers than by readers, because he's really held in very high esteem in terms of his craft, in terms of his intelligence, in terms of just all of his work. And I began with his book called Peace. Let's see if I have a copy here. Otherwise, I'll show it anyway, which is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. It's a unique book that has an eerie and very mysterious feel to it. And Gene Wolfe is playing a game during this book that won't allow you to get to the end without starting to reread it from the beginning. And this is why there is a joke that I read in many different reviews and people say about Gene Wolfe, which is you don't read Gene Wolfe, you reread Gene Wolfe. Absolutely masterful, and I absolutely recommend him if you like fantasy, if you like. And I also mentioned the name to people who love fantasy and read a lot of fantasy books, and even then it's not very well known, so I would open up the recommendation really to anybody. What is the book you regret for not reading? And I'm sorry, maybe I haven't completely answered the first question, which was what kind of phase you went through. I went to a phase after reading Peace because I started reading Gene Wolfe's masterpiece, which is the Book of the New Sun, which is a quadrilogy, and probably the only one of two Folio Society books that I own, and this is it. But I read it in Italian, the first book of the quadrilogy, and I unfortunately did not manage to finish the other books, so I'm gonna have to finish them this year. That's the answer to question 2. Question 3, what is the book you regret not reading? The book that I regret not reading is City of God by St. Augustine, because there is a great read-along that some booktubers are doing in these days. I think it's driven by Faith of Faith and Books, and I would love to be part of it, but I realized I've gotten, I need a bit more discipline in my read-alongs, and so I have a lot of reading commitments. I want to try and keep them. If I started City of God now, everything else would kind of fall apart. So I'm kind of following, but from a high level without being able to really read it. I hope I'll be able to read and tackle the City of God in the second part of the year. But it's such a seminal work. It's quoted by Dante 1,000 times. It's quoted by everybody in the Christian tradition, in philosophy, even non-Christian. So it's a very fundamental work that I would love to read possibly this year. Number 4. What is something you learned from reading this year? I think I learned a lot this year from a couple of non-fiction books that I read, and one of them I haven't quite finished yet, but it's actually part of a read-along I'm doing with Christy Lewis of Dostoevsky in Space. And this is the book Congo, The Epic History of a People by David van Rijbroek, who is a Belgian author and reporter who is talking about the history of his own country, because the history of Congo starts, of course, before the colonization by Belgium, but the clash of civilizations and culture starts with the colonization by Belgium. I would say one of the various fascinating facts and information that I learned from this book is the fact that Congo is the only colony that's ever been owned by one single individual. And this single individual was Leopold II, the second king of Belgium. There is a lot of darkness around this historic character. We have to be careful not to transform him into a cartoonish evil villain, because that's really not the case. But chronicles from the time saw him, Leopold II, in a particular period of the colonization, and specifically when rubber was found in Congo, and there was a huge demand for rubber from around the world for the tires of the first cars, etc., that the methods he was using in the Congo, without even having ever traveled to Congo himself, were more inhuman and more ruthless than anyone who had colonies back in those times. So the justification, those were the times, the cultural landscape was different, don't really quite apply to Leopold II. So on one hand, let's not exaggerate, but on the other, let's remember that directly and indirectly, it's calculated that because of his actions in the Congo, he caused the death of something like 40 million, if not more, people in Congo. Of course, a lot of them for illnesses, but there is a lot of interesting history in there to be read. It's a book that I would recommend to anybody. Prompt number 5. What is a book that you wish you talked about more? Very interesting question here. I'm picking a science fiction book that is one of my favorite classics of science fiction by Philip J. Farmer, who is a fantastically fun author of science fiction. Very fast-paced, adventurous, fun, a lot of joy to read. And the book that I have in mind is Makers of Universes, which is such a fascinating title if you think about it, Makers of Universes, which is the first volume of his World of Tears series, that, by the way, has a lot of Divine Comedy references because of the shape of this world. The world building is amazing, and everyone that I recommended this series to has loved it. So I can only tell you that. And in speaking with people who know the science fiction from the golden era, everyone loves Philip Farmer, and he certainly has a big role in the pantheon of science fiction. Prompt number 6. What is a non-bookish highlight from 2021? And I'm glad because the prompt is asking movie, show, song, podcast, etc. So I can talk about music for a second. I'm going to pick a song, and I hope you're going to be grateful because there is an extremely underappreciated artist in America in these days. And his name is Curtis Harding. Curtis Harding. I want to link him below with no problem. Last year in particular, I discovered his new song that's called I Won't Let You Down. But if you listen to some of his recent works, like for example, Need Your Love, he is creating music that is a little retro, old soul type of music. And so you have a sense that you might have already heard that style. But when you hear his voice, which is divine, and the bass lines that he's using, and the precision, the quality of his musicians in his band, I'm hoping that you will thank me, because he is one of the greatest current artists who are working in the industry, and they are producing music. I wonder why it hasn't blown up yet. This is how great I think he is and how talented. Curtis Harding. Number 7. What is the greatest outlier in your books? My reading is very eclectic all the time, so any book is not going to feel like an outlier in my other books, because there's no real sense of belonging to a particular genre or or anything like that. I looked at this kind of 70 books that I read last year, which is a little bit maybe of a slightly lower average for me because I've read so many books about Dante, and I'm not counting those ones for last year. But those were for if there's something that really sticks out, is a book about banking and the history of banking, the history of the problem of the transformation of deposit into credit, which is written by the former head of the Bank of England, so the Central Bank of England. His name is Mervyn King, and the title of the book is The End of Alchemy, Money, Banking, and the Future of the Global Economy. I think it's from maybe 8 years ago or 9 years ago, maybe 8 years ago. It's very much a product of the recession of 2009 and 10. I believe Mervyn King was the central banker in those years, and then he retired after. But obviously it's an outlier because it talks about macroeconomics in general, but the book has a very discursive tone. It's a, let's say, divulgative type of book, and nothing academic and nothing too technical. But at the same time, it does, in the first part, refreshes some basic economy concepts in your mind. They're always useful. And then in the second part, addresses his opinion of what is wrong, or what is a weakness or a risk inherent in the global banking system. When he talks about the end of alchemy, when he talks about the alchemy this metaphor that he's making is that he believes that banks all over the world are transforming deposits, in other words, cash that we consumers bring to the bank, into credit. While cash is liquid, credit is not liquid. So having value that is stored for some time in the future, and arguing that this value is not always immediately withdrawable, he talks about alchemy. He talks about something that does not have a perfect parallel in reality between the liquid deposit and the future restitution of a credit, or the relationship in time between the consumer and the creditor or the institution. So it's a really interesting book. It's not too technical. You don't need to be a specialist to understand it, to enjoy it. And if you happen to have some questions about the global world of banking, and you don't want to just use the usual stereotypes that are being thrown around on the internet, this is the book to read. Number 8, what book are you most excited to revisit? It's always a Divine Comedy for me. I'm going to be completely honest. Just like the scriptures, I keep rereading, I keep going back to the Bible as part of my faith, but I keep going back to the Divine Comedy. It's like a cow, something that you can just go back and milk constantly, and there is always something that is productive, that is fruitful, that is useful and nurturing. So that's my answer. 9. What video are you most proud of? What video? I'm most proud of the videos that I made with participants, where somebody joined my videos. In fact, I had, I believe, a couple of videos with Dan Christian, who is a teacher. He's been teaching literature and the Divine Comedy for many years. We talked about a couple of specific cantos, together with Jennifer Brooks as well. I really love that. I had a video with Father Paul Pearson from Canada, who has been writing amazing books based on Divine Comedy. They are called Spiritual Direction from Dante. So for each of the 3 canticles, Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso, Father Pearson has written a canto by canto spiritual direction book, and that interview was amazing. So when I think about the videos that I'm most proud of, those are the ones, because it's always the chemistry and the effect, the combined energy, the 1 + 1 = 3, I think is always unbeatable. I would also mention a great video of Canto 30 of Purgatorio, together with Anna Chiara Mariani, who is an Italian professor of Italian literature in the US. And then recently a really good conversation and chat about atheism and faith with Brandon of Brandon Bookshelf. I really enjoyed that one as well. Finally, last question: what is your favorite last line of a book? And this is not going to be a big surprise. The favorite last line of a book for me is "L'amor che muove il sole ed altre stelle." There is a bonus question, in fact, number 11. Is there a creator or video you'd like to shout out? Yes, there are a couple. So I would like to shout out, first of all, Ursula, from Ursula Odds and Sods. She is an indie author, and she loves Dante and Divine Comedy just like me. We always have really interesting conversations, and she's got so much insight. She knows so much about the Middle Ages and just history in general. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to read her work yet, but I know I will. And she's just a very intelligent person overall. And if you want to hear some clever thoughts about any book that she talks about, tune into her channel. I'm linking it down here. I also would like to shout out probably 2 more channels. One is by Caitlin at Bandis Books. She has such a fascinating kind of origin story or background story. She is a chef, and at a certain point in her life, she told us in her channel that she made this great decision to travel around the world. Very interesting background, very interesting person, and very interesting readings and books. And finally, someone that I've met recently online in BookTube as well. Her name is Joanna at Serene Sloth. She has a really great, joyful energy in her videos, and talks about a very eclectic array of books, from fantasy to contemporary to historic novels, and she's a lot of fun. She's a real joy to watch her videos. So please tune in, and give these booktubers subscribe, because they are growing their channels, and deservedly so. There is a lot of interesting content there. Well, thank you if you got to this point. Thanks for listening, and we'll speak soon.